the people.
Governor Brown, thank you for spending a half an hour with C-SPAN on the night before the election.
Thank you, and I want to tell you this C-SPAN is the equalizer. With this technology and this two-way communication, we are revolutionizing. We're revolutionizing this whole presidential campaign and America itself.
Thanks again.
Former Minnesota Senator Eugene McCarthy, who first ran for the presidency 24 years ago, is again running for the Democratic nomination. He is in New Hampshire looking for votes before Tuesday's primary. In 1968, he pulled down 40% of the New Hampshire primary vote, and his support in the state led to President Lyndon Johnson's decision not to seek re-election. Earlier Monday, he was in the lobby of the Holiday Inn in downtown Manchester meeting with reporters. He discussed his 1992 presidential campaign, why he entered the race, and how his message is being taken by the party establishment.
Senator Eugene McCarthy, a Democratic presidential candidate here in New Hampshire. How different is this race versus 1968?
Well, I don't know. I haven't been able to get into this race, largely because the media won't accept that I'm even here. It's different, though. We had one issue in '68, and it was defined. You didn't have to explain what the issue was. So you could really give a test of it in a primary. I think when you get into a complexity of issues, it's very difficult to deal with a primary within the party. I have some sympathy for the 4 or 5 people who are included, because you're trying to make distinctions, but yet to make them within a limited kind of politics that doesn't allow for real distinctions. So the process that they're using now, I don't think it helps to clear up politics or policy in the country. It's sort of a distraction.
How would you change that system here and in other states?
If I had my way, I'd ban all political ads from television. Just let television do detergents and toothpaste and stuff like that. We don't let them advertise tobacco and liquor now, because this would corrupt people. We really ought to eliminate religion and politics at the other level and just let them work on, as I said, detergents and X-Lax and stuff like that.
How are you trying to get your message out in this state?
If you're going to use television, they should just give people time to get on and talk, and let the people who listen can sort of go from one presentation to another without having it all jammed into what we get now in these debates presided over by the League of Women Voters, which probably knows less about politics than any institution in the country.
What is the message of the McCarthy campaign? Well,
I've been trying to get it out. I made a mistake. I should have just gone around saying I'm here, because we haven't established that we're here, and then go on to talk about it. And it's a pretty clear message that the country's in deep trouble. First of all, we're not responding to the foreign policy opportunities we have, either in the Middle East or in Central Europe, but we're not really facing up to the domestic disorder. There are no proposals that are going to deal with 10 million unemployed that have been presented yet by the Democrats. We really have no solution being proposed to the imbalance of trade, which is going to be about $100 billion, and we have no real program for dealing with the national debt. And I've talked about all 3 of them, and I think have the only programs that will work in the historical context in which we're trying to deal with these things.
Where do you go next after this primary?
Well, I don't know where anybody goes. Super Tuesday, everybody's going to be in the jungle for a while, you know, because that's really jungle politics. There's no definition. It's all jammed up into one short period. We go to Massachusetts. We're on the ballot there. And we're working on getting on the ballot. We'll be on, I guess we're on in about 15 states now, and the process of getting on is working pretty much with ACLU groups in various states. This is a whole other story that ought to be covered now, which is going on, the question of access to the ballot around the country, and the denials primarily by party leaders trying to keep people off the ballot, which is a real story. There's a story here about access to television and access to the voters, but we'll work on it, and it may be that we'll develop enough evidence for a challenge to the federal election law in the Supreme Court, a kind of continuation or picking up from where we were in '76.
You've touched on this already, but based in your years on politics, how is it different today to be a presidential candidate than it was 20 or 30 years ago? The whole process, the way the media works, the way that candidates work.
I think the media thing is, there was no attempt on the part of the media in '68 to determine who would run. There's no question but what the media has pretty much determined who is to be considered a candidate. And it's a new power they've taken on of picking the candidates. Instead of responding to the action of the people and sort of picking up candidates and building them up, you start at the other end. For example, they just declared I was not a serious candidate without defining what serious means. And the media, especially television, is into making instant rash judgments. I mean, they do it every night. They try to compress the whole of society. I always wonder about West Coast people when how they tolerate it, especially when Cronkite was on. And if I was on the West Coast, I'd hear Walter say, "That's it. That's the way it is today." And I knew he said it 3 hours earlier. So what did Walter do? Just wipe out the last 3 hours of my life every afternoon? And then I go back east, and Walter says, "That's the way it is," and I'm here. So I'm back in reality. But on the West Coast, Walter has said it, you know, and they talk about an update occasion, but most of your life for 3 hours every day, if you're in California, is still wiped out by Dan Rather. And, you know, who would like to have his life entrusted to Dan Rather or Tom Brokaw? I mean, you know, Brokaw, you kind of think you have to help him draw lines between the spots on the Howard Johnson children's placemat. And here he is saying, you know, that's the way it is, or whatever they say, or saying I'm not a candidate, Tom Brokaw. I say, well, that's where we live, between Brokaw on the East Coast and 3 hours later on the West Coast. And we're trying to break in there and establish a little reality and save the country for 3 hours a day from Tom Brokaw and then Dan Rather.
Former Senator Eugene McCarthy, Democratic presidential candidate. Thank you.
Well, we'll get to the issues when we get beyond New Hampshire, I think.
President Bush's chief Republican challenger, columnist, and television commentator Pat Buchanan today conducted a whistle-stop tour of New Hampshire. He visited Portsmouth, Concord, Manchester, Merrimack, Bedford, and Laconia. Coming up next, you will see his campaign